Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves, and today we're talking about resilience. I think ultimately is what I try to say. What will I say? No, it's about being resilient. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and the man who's looking to buy a Yamaha VMAX. Is that?
Yeah, VMAX.
Yeah, because if cancer hasn't killed him, he wants to get on a motorbike and strap himself to a rocket.
True.
But much more importantly, I'm delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by human rights lawyer and chief executive of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, Noeline Blackwell. Noeline, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Asher, it's a great pleasure, Tony. Delighted to be here with you and Martin.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah,
it's delighted, and the day that's in it, the sun is trying to break through as well.
Exactly, and it's a bank holiday weekend start.
Fabulous. Fabulous. That's mean everybody has to listen to this twice over the bank holiday weekend.
No, honestly, Noeline, I know we are a hindrance to people. We do come back and say, "Oh, come on, please come on," and all the rest of it. But we do mean it. We do mean it comes from a good place. And the reason it was so great to get you to come in is, I think you have covered such a wide variety of things in your roles. And I know most recently in your own, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, you have seen an upsurge in actually feminism and whether you want to call it men looking at their own how they've actually behaved, their own behaviours, their own beliefs, and questioning things for the first time. I think it's been really positive to see these types of changes, even though it's been kind of it's even been uncomfortable in workplaces and things like that.
Yeah.
How have you found the last few months?
Yes, and I think this is going on nearly a year or more. There is an increasing worry in our whole community, I think, about how to address things around sexual violence, sexual harassment, abuse, rape. Obviously, over the past couple of months, it's been huge, the level of interest, because mainly of the celebrity rape trial in Belfast. But even before that, with the Me Too movement, with a whole lot of concern, I think, in women about how they were seen by men, we are seeing a spotlight on the whole area right now, an area that was very hidden. So I've been with the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre for the past 2 years. And at the time, I remember thinking at the start, this is worthwhile doing because there is a need to recognise that women's rights in particular, men's rights as well, but women's rights in particular, in the area of sexual violence and domestic violence were not well recognised. In fact, I'm so old that I remember when the movement started in the 70s for women's rights. When we joined the European Union, some effort was made towards more equality in pay. Women were more recognised as people in their own rights, but actually in the area of sexual violence and domestic violence, they were still very hidden, and there was very little recognition of how attitudes hadn't changed and how respect for people by other people hadn't changed at a time when the rest of the world was changing hugely. So I think over the past year, and actually I really do think it's one of the unintended consequences of President Trump being elected in America as well. One of the things that has happened is we are starting to question our own attitudes to each other in the area of sexual activity, and also question whether we are doing enough to prevent domestic violence and sexual violence. So this is a bad time in some ways, because we're seeing the extent of the problem opening out again, but it's a good time if we are starting to deal with it.
And I think that's a really good point, because I remember someone said that if Trump had made his grab them by the pussy remark 6 months later than he did, he'd never probably have gotten elected, because what had happened is even in America it had come too soon for the awakening of the let's all look at ourselves, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, what is the Me Too movement, what is time is up, and all of these things. Whereas Trump was kind of he kind of got in before the light was shone on a lot of these things.
Yes,
but he was actually a catalyst to the.
I think that's right. I mean, the Women's March the day after really energised women throughout North America. And And it just, because we look so much to that part of the world for our thinking as well, that thinking was able to, I suppose, be picked up here, where a lot of people were already working on these issues. Like, it's not that there haven't been people highlighting over the past 40 years the dangers of domestic violence and sexual violence. They have. But this allowed a wider audience to listen, to look, and to feel uncomfortable. And that discomfort is probably good for all of us.
Well, we've had some really amazing women in here as guests, and they have been so brave in telling us what has happened to them and their stories. Like Tony and I are genuinely gobsmacked when people tell us this stuff. We are genuinely, and we worry about how do we deal with. We try our best to deal with it in an adult sort of way. But we're always shocked that these stories are there. And it seems to have come to the stage, particularly with Me Too, that women are saying, don't be shocked. This is normal.
Yeah.
So you have to change. You have to work within your peer group to change those around you as well.
Yeah.
But you've tried for years to get extra funding for the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, and you had a funding crisis for ages. How does that feel when you're fighting a good fight, but you're not getting the support behind it?
Yeah, so, and here I have to pay credit to all my predecessors. Ellen O'Malley Dunlop was there through the worst of the recession. Before her, Olive Braden, great women, you know, and others as well, but people who did massive work in that area. But the recession was brutal to the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and to other rape crisis centres around the country. You know, regular year after year cuts done in a way that simply said, we don't have the money, you are not going to get it, leaving the staff of the centre trying to keep up the level of service that people needed, because a big chunk of the work of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre is working with people in individual therapy, working with people who need to phone the National 24-hour helpline, trying to keep that going at a time where people were being, the numbers were being reduced. I think that I wasn't there at the time, but there nearly was a walkout when they said there was no money anymore for tea bags. You know, that literally the centre was kept open, the clients were still seen, but the staff, it was very hard. And there was no investment in the work of the centre. So things over that time deteriorated, so that when I went in there 2 years ago, the computers being used were computers from the 20th century, 1999, that had been given secondhand along the way. So there was no capacity to improve the service, to build better capacity, because there had been no investment for the 10 years. We weren't alone. Everybody in that sector took the same level of hurt and hit. And what I think is that, in a sense, there was no focus on this is a vital service that has to be kept going. And instead, it was seen as something, we will give you what is left over or what we can afford. And that wasn't just the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. It wasn't even all rape crisis centres. It was done throughout the health service.
Yes.
That lack of understanding that there was a bottom line that we should not have gone below.
The floor we should never
did.
have fell below. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually, there's a whole construct in human rights where if you construct things differently, you do have red lines. Minister Michael Noonan was the Minister for Finance at the time, a great man for there's no red line. There's nothing we won't cut. If there was a human rights perspective to our budgeting, there is. There's a bottom line, a minimum core below which you don't go. And if that had been the case, then more service would have been provided. So it's huge credit to the staff of our centre, all the other centres, and all those working in the area of sexual and domestic violence, that they managed to keep going at all. But there was harm done, because it meant a whole lot of people too that we should have been reaching out to. We couldn't. And the trouble with sexual violence in particular, I think, is that it's so hidden anyway. You were saying there, Martin, that you had great people coming in, you have had, who will talk about the harm done to themselves. But in order, you have to do a lot of thinking through to recognise it's not your shame, that it's not your fault, that you were assaulted, that assault was a rape. And often your community doesn't want to hear that either. They don't want to know. The people you work with don't want to know that your boss raped you. The people in your family don't want to know that your brother sexually abused you. You know, that your friends don't want to know that somebody in your group did something. So it's a very hard harm to talk about. And that's why they were great. They are great. The people who can come to the conclusion that they know it's not their fault and actually that they'll work to stop it for other people. They're beyond brilliant. But during those years, it just died. Nobody cared because it's a hidden violence. You could forget about it.
Yes.
You know, and now actually our society in Ireland can't forget about it. And that's really important. And people are trying to work out, how do we stop it? Of course, we don't know about the situation is because we haven't had proper study on this.
That's right. And you have spoken about this, and Vincent Brown has
exactly
many times backed you on
Vincent
this.
Brown has, it's an absolute obsession with him. There is no
and
doubt.
rightly so.
And rightly so. And what I have said is, not only just for all of those working with the victims of sexual violence, for us, it's really important, but the government is actually spending money on fighting sexual violence, and they don't know what it is.
They can't quantify.
They can't quantify.
Yeah.
So they're spending money based on their gut instinct. Now, that's not a great way to spend taxpayers' money.
No, and it's a very lonely place for any woman. As you said, you know, your community doesn't want to know. I mean, so it's a very lonely place. And what the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre is give people somewhere to go, to talk, to try and heal.
Yeah, and that phone line is often the thing.
Yes.
Often you won't get people sometimes to walk in easily, because sometimes on the phone you'll hear people saying things like, something happened. I don't know what it was. It wasn't rape, but something happened.
Yeah.
And then as they talk, indeed it was rape, but it's, you know, if you have to acknowledge it, it's hard sometimes for people to even acknowledge it to themselves. So the phone can be great, and we record hang-ups as well as people who talk.
So that you have an idea.
Yeah, so sometimes the hang-up might be because somebody has a wrong number, of course. But sometimes people will say, I phoned 3 times and it's only this 4th time that I can say something to you, you know. So it's great. It is great. It's great to have somewhere safe to say it.
How is the funding situation now? Yeah,
so we are still by no means properly funded for the service we deliver. So about 80% of the cost of services is funded by TUSLA. The Child and Family Agency, through the Department of Children and Youth Affairs is our main funder. You see, we're a funny organisation because we cross a couple of departments. The therapy work is health work. We accompany people to courts and Garda stations. That's Department of Justice work. We do work across consent and training people. That's Department of Education work, you know. So I remember asking, indeed, why was TUSLA funding us, the Child and Family Agency? And I think the answer I got was kind of, well, someone has to. And indeed, it's not a bad start, because so often we are connected into families and people's family lives are disrupted by sexual violence. So it is a good place for funding. But some of the funding has come back. So we've been able to, for instance, this year we'll be able to deliver therapy to 100 more people than we were able to last year. We will put in place an up-to-date telephone system that allows us to do more text messaging and, you know, social media messaging that we can't do now. But we still have a huge, so 2 things, I suppose. There's still a gap in existing services, that we have too long a waiting list. And it's not, we don't mind people coming onto the waiting list. That's probably a good thing.
Yes.
If people are ready to talk, that's great. But having to wait over 6 months, 6 or 7 or 8 months, you know. So people who are recently raped will always get to talk to somebody within a week or two of asking, always. And the week or two might be because they can't come into us at a certain time. Yeah. But if what you're disclosing is a rape that happened some time ago, you could be waiting for 6 or 7 months at that kind of time now. And that's far, far too long. So we make that point to Tusla. We don't actually have enough capacity to deal with the people we have right now. But actually the other point, and I'm really only making it since Belfast, our lives in the Rape Crisis Centre are pre the Belfast verdict on the 28th of March and post the Belfast verdict, because it has changed so much. I think it has opened up something to say, actually, a small increase in funding to us to help us to deal with the people on our waiting list is no longer enough. We now know that sexual abuse and sexual aggression and rape are far more widespread than they were. We also know we have to do something about the justice system, because if we don't fix the justice system, if people won't report, then rapists will continue to be able to rape with impunity. So, and we have to teach our children more quickly, in a more coherent way, about how to say yes, how to say no, how to handle themselves, how to build healthy relationships. So in a sense, a bit more of the same is, in our view, no good. We actually have to recognise it is like you would say we had a disease in our society for the past 30 years. And suddenly we've discovered it's there. If it was polio or HIV or something obvious, you would find that you would have to introduce huge new resources.
Well, if it only spread on the male genome, we probably have dealt with it 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, but funny thing about men and sexual violence is where they are the victims of sexual violence, it's much harder for them to report, as far as we can see. There are additional barriers. And that's all coming back to the way we think about our genders. Not our sex, not the male, female, but we think men are expected to be pushy, to be persuasive, to be requiring women to give in, and women are supposed to be passive and the rest of it. In fact, that's not our lives anymore. It's not always women and men. It's often women and women, men and men. It is children we're seeing the extent of children being abused as boys and girls. And for all of those reasons, men are going to have to be clearer as well to each other that it's okay to be a victim of sexual violence. Do not be the perpetrator of it. Certainly we need to do more work in that area. But also in terms of victims, like 20% of the people who call our phone lines are men. And 10% of the people who come into us for therapy are men, you know. And so it's...
And you think that could be significantly higher if men felt more comfortable reporting?
I think that's right. There is that sense that that they have extra barriers to reporting that we don't know about. But it is interesting because I also get asked the whole time when somebody new that I meet, so they say, and I say, you know, 1 in 3 women is likely to have experienced sexual violence in their lifetimes. And that seems to be, all the stats seem to say that, even more recent ones, Europewide. And they say, but what about men? It's really interesting. It's going back to your point, Martin, that, Tony, that in some ways, that if it was mainly men, it probably would have been, it would have been outed sooner.
Well, I think of, like, I know we saw the commemorations where people went down to Dublin Castle to smash the windows for
Hannah Sheehy's Geffington.
But I think of the better one was where Mary Lee threw the hatchet at Asquith, and I think she just missed. Right?
Yes.
We didn't have a reenactment of that one yet, but
no.
I'm not encouraging it. I want to be clear. I'm not encouraging it. No. But we do have, you know, when you talk about, you know, okay, let's say it's a women-led movement. Absolutely, men have a significant role to play, and we also, and I think you touched on a very important part around education. You know, and around talking about consent, talking about these things. I actually think there's a nice awkwardness to what's happened with the No campaign posters, because the No campaign posters are littering my things outside, and they're forcing people to have to explain to their children things that maybe they wouldn't have done, and they're forcing us to have awkward conversations that maybe we would have avoided. And then we can also have awkward conversations about, you know, respect for, and how you treat women or how you treat one another, what a relationship means, what consent means. Those things now, they're out in the you can have a conversation now. And I think that the fact that we can look at these, you know, license to kill posters and a 9-year-old says, Dad, what does that mean?
Yes.
And you have to have that conversation. Well, I think it's part of actually us as parents or adults or just grown-ups in the room to be able to grasp the nettle and have those awkward conversations.
Yeah, but you know, you wouldn't be starting from there for preference. You wouldn't be starting from that negative spot. Mm-hmm. In the same way, in relation to sexual violence, you wouldn't be starting with whispering about a rape or saying, you know, Auntie was raped, or, you know, my daddy's going to jail for what he did to you, you know. You wouldn't be starting there. You would be starting in a different place. And I think part of the problem is that as Irish people, we're really bad at saying yes and no. You know, the way, even myself, I notice how often I say something like, yeah, no, it's okay. And, you know, how many sort of, in the one sentence, I've kind of given all sorts of different ideas about what my idea is.
I actually think the people that do well in business are those who can say yes and no much more clearly than we do as a general population. I mean, we are it's not that we're indecisive. I think it's maybe our history that we've always had to play both sides of the fence, or we've always had to be
cautious.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
I think people who can say yes, no very strongly, that we're a bit shocked when they do.
Well, absolutely true. The Thames Valley Police do a great little video about consent, equating it to a cup of tea. And it's probably partly the fact that we're so influenced by England over all the centuries of that. But they do this little video about, you offer somebody a cup of tea, but you don't force them to drink the cup of tea if they change their mind. You don't force them to drink the cup of tea if they're asleep. You know, you don't, so you keep them safe, all of these things. And it's really good because it reminds you that somebody can say yes to something, change their mind, decide they don't want it, and you got to listen. And we know how to listen when it's a cup of tea, so we don't in relation to sexual violence. So it is that business. But if you were to talk to a child about consent, well, you wouldn't be doing it in the context of, you know, a sexual activity for the child. But you could be training a child to understand, first of all, what's uncomfortable for them and keeping them safer. And the other thing is, you could be getting them into a habit of recognizing and talking about it, being more forceful about it. And as you say, it could actually be good for business as well, Martin. Who's to know? Like, you could actually do better in your business career as well.
You're developing. You can develop a confidence in all of these. Like, these are all life skills.
Yes, and again, I mention it so often that I think they'd nearly like me to leave them alone. There's a school down in Kells in County Meath, the Eureka School, which did a transition year. 15 girls did a transition year project called It's the Yes, Not the Dress. And we brought them up to the launch of our annual report. We brought them to meet the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs and things like that, because we thought they were fantastic. And they did this poster, and they did a social innovators presentation on it, and I think they won awards and all sorts of things, but they're great. And the 15 girls were just really clear on what yes and no meant. And I often think that meant that their friends were also much clearer, because they were talking to their friends. Their homes were clearer about how to talk about consent. They were clearer with their boyfriends as they went along to talk about it. And therefore, the whole town of Kells is that bit safer for those 15 girls talking about consent in such an engaged and engaging way.
You've been working recently very hard on sentencing.
Yes.
Tell us how that's going.
Yeah. So just, it is so important as part of the justice system, because there are a few things that are really important. First of all, the investigation by the guards. I'll come to the question eventually, Martin. Within the justice system, there is the investigation by the guards. The first point of contact for so many, it has to be a good one. or people will fall out, and people do fall out, and people are hurt by the investigation. And then there's the trial, which, if the defendant is exercising his rights to defend the case fully, the complainant has to go through all of the evidence again in the way that we saw in the Belfast trial was so brutal. And the third thing then is the element: do I go through all of that, and what do I know about the sentence at the end of it? So this is not really about tougher sentences, although I do think we have to look at sentencing that way as well. But the toughest sentence is available for rape. If someone is convicted of rape, they can get a life sentence. And sometimes they do. And sometimes they get long sentences. But sometimes they get very short sentences. And the question is that the complainant, the person going in to give their evidence, does not know until the day of the hearing what judge they're going to get and what the sentence is going to look like. It may very well be smoothed out a little bit later in the Court of Appeal, but this is way too much for somebody to go in. The apparent lack of consistency in sentencing is a real problem. And many, in the noughties, even the courts could recognise this was an issue, and they started building up a database, putting down all the charges, all the convictions, all the sentences, all the facts that would make a sentence harder or longer, all the things that make a sentence lighter, put them all down, and then come the recession, it stopped. Now, it should be started up again. It's really important that would be built up again. It had the name at the time because it was pre a whole lot of things. It was called ISIS, the Irish Sentencing Information System. So they couldn't call it ISIS anymore. But it does need to be reconstructed, and that could be done very quickly.
Members?
Yeah.
No, and like that's like.
But that's only half of it.
Yeah.
That's only half of it. And the other half of it then is guidelines. And at the moment, it's really interesting. There's actually a discussion amongst the judiciary at the moment going on. Justice Unani Rafferty came out and said that point about she thought it was bizarre not to have the database. And then Justice Tony Hunt came out and said, oh, look, it's all very transparent. And I read down through his piece, in case I had it totally wrong. I read down through the report, and he said, it's very transparent. Everyone can see it if they read the Court of Appeal decisions. Yeah. Well, do you see, that might be transparent if you're a judge of the High Court.
Yes.
It's not that transparent to the three of us. And I'm a trained lawyer, and it's not that transparent to me either.
It's not that transparent to a victim either.
No, and that's exactly where we're at. It is not transparent to a victim. The victim doesn't understand what exactly are the factors that are going to be taken into account. And I think this is really hard on someone going in not knowing exactly what will be taken into account. And it's also, you can't manage the complainant's expectations in that case. You can't say, look, given this is the level of the charge, and given this is the set of guidelines, this is the likely sentence. Yes. Do you know? Whereas in England and Wales, which isn't a perfect system, they have a committee that makes them up. Not just the judges, but there are victims on it, there are police on it, there are social workers on it, and they construct quite a small booklet, but it's a book of guidelines. And everyone working with victims can go through that book and say, these are all of the things that are taken into account. And they will be reviewed. Judges' sentences will be reviewed against the guidelines. If you had that, it wouldn't necessarily give the right length of sentence, but it would give all of us a better understanding of what length of sentence is being handed down for what is considered the second most serious crime in the country. Yeah. And the mitigating factors that are taken into account are extraordinary sometimes. They're so focused on the person who's convicted. His loss of reputation, and it's not always a him, but it's normally a him. Yes. His loss of reputation, the fact that his family is broken up. There's very little about the genuine lifelong harm to the victim. So these are the things that sentencing guidelines could do. And at the moment, there's a judicial council bill in the Dáil. And I notice Deputy Donogh O'Leary from Sinn Féin is trying to press for a better structure around this. But there is a sentence in that about a database which would be available to judges. It's a start. So there's a recognition that something needs to be done. But if that could be used to build better database and better and build up guidelines, then you would have people more confident in the justice system. And it's really in all of our interest that the justice system is hearing from complainants that they're going to court, and that those who are convicted of rape and sexual abuse are sentenced appropriately.
Well, I think we all know individual stories. We all know where cases have been. There's one locally where, and as you said, it was brought into the impact on his family, the impact he was an airline financing guy, so he was of a certain stature in the community, and and was allowed to use an excuse of mixing cough medicine with heart medication, and all of these things were allowed to be. And in the long end of it, I think it took another couple of years to get any sort of reasonable.
And in fact, that's one of the good things that can happen if a sentence is too lenient. The DPP, but that's very recent, the DPP can go back in and appeal it on the basis that it was too lenient. And so there are some small checks and balances, and the courts and the judges and the lawyers working in the area are happy with all that. You see, they're happy with it, and they think it's all working. But if you're out there and if you're working with victims, it just looks like a system that is so horrendous that you need huge strength to complain.
You keep going.
Yeah.
Do you think there should be, besides guidelines, which would seem to be a very obvious basic first step, do you think there should be some sort of training, some sort of across-the-board mandatory training for those in the legal system for dealing with sexual violence?
Absolutely. And I think that is actually going to happen. I think one of the things that Belfast showed up as well was some of the questions that were being asked produced pretty well every single one of the rape myths that everyone has ever heard. And the new rape myth that if there are nice middle-class girls downstairs, well, then you would obviously scream for protection from them. That was a new version of one of the existing myths. So without a doubt, and it's a funny thing, actually, nobody really understands. You're not taught in law school, and you're not taught in judge school, of which is kind of discretionary. You're not taught about, say, the impact of trauma on somebody's memory. That actually, as a matter of science, a person will not remember in the same way after a traumatic event. That would actually be useful for the lawyers, not just for sexual violence and domestic violence, but for all sorts of other areas as well. Because judges or lawyers like to go at the thing. So this happened, and then that happened, and then the other happened, and this was the consequence. They like all of that kind of thing. But that's not the messy way that sexual violence trauma happens.
Yes.
That people remember differently. People don't remember at all. People remember much later. It's like children. Children remember so differently as well. Asking somebody to go to court 5 years after, if they were raped at 9 years of age, it's
half a lifetime.
It's half a lifetime, and there is no way they can remember it, or if they can, they're really damaged if they're holding on to that all along the way. So there is such a need for training in this area. Mandatory. Sometimes when people will go along and just do the tick box exercise, I think if we did good training and good people came along to it, they would show that they're getting better outcomes. So in some ways, you would find they'd want to do it if they were working in the area.
It doesn't seem that it would be that difficult to introduce something like that.
Yeah.
That would be entirely within the government's hands to say, well, every time we appoint a judge, they go off for 3 months and they do victim impact training or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, that would be the ideal. God Almighty, if we had 3 months. But we could do a lot with them actually in the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre if they're with us for 3 months.
It would be such a great idea.
It would be extraordinary. But actually, the lawyers themselves should be doing it. The government shouldn't have to do this. And the lawyers are starting to do it. We have new laws around victims now, victims' rights, and the lawyers are starting to understand that they don't know enough about it. So they are doing some work in this. And in fairness to the lawyers, they are talking to us as well about how you would construct a better, say, one of the things we were talking about, could we have a dialogue between our counsellors who, because of their experience with their clients, distrust the justice system, and the lawyers who are working in this area, just have a dialogue, just see where are the gaps, what is needed. So that's probably going to happen over the next
in
while.
In all professions now, CPD, continuous professional development programs exist, and every year that you have to do certain things in certain modules. It would seem something as basic as that when you could turn around and have to commit to a certain number of these things. I mean, we're not talking about like stealing something that you couldn't take from other industries, if I can be so...
Exactly. I mean, there's good training out there, and we do it. We've been doing it for decades, like in the rape crisis, because we saw, well before my time, saw the need for not just dealing with therapy for people, but helping other people outside of ourselves, other psychotherapists, people working with homeless people, people working with refugees, other people, teachers, all of them, to better understand how to deal with it as well. And we have done some sort of random training with lawyers over time as well, but there is just a real value for the lawyers themselves in having more training in that area. And I think we will be doing more with them now, because everyone is going, do you know what you're talking about? Whether you're a prosecutor, whether you're a defender, whether you're a judge. But the other people that we have to also train are the general public, because they're the jury.
Yes.
And when you go in on these serious sexual violence cases, it's the jury makes the decision about whether there was consensual sex or whether it was an assault, and therefore rape. So in a sense, the general public as well has to question the whole time. And we do have to build into the court processes ways that the jury can be stripped of some of those preconceptions. We all have preconceptions. Yes. We all go in with something or other. So, so that's a big area of work right now, because as I say, it's a big part of the battle. The first part of the battle is, does the victim feel safe? Are they safe? And are they getting the help that they need to heal? That's item number 1. Item number 2 is, are we stopping? Are we reducing sexual violence? In order to do that, that's the stick bit for the most part. People have to report. People have to go to court. And their sentences have to be appropriate for that. And we also have to work with the other things, because so many victims and perpetrators know each other, like 3 out of 4 roughly will know each other. We also have to work on other things like restorative justice, getting people to be able to in some way link back into their family, so that a child can ask, for instance, their parent why they did it, and the parent to explain why they did it. There's a new film out called The Meeting. It's fascinating. And I think it was in the film festival, but I think it was the weekend of the snow. Right. But I saw, so people may not have seen it. But it is about a young woman who was raped by a stranger, and who really wanted to know why he did it. And the film is about 80 minutes long, and it's all about them talking to each other over an hour and she plays herself in it. Okay, somebody else plays the person who was convicted of the crime. And it was a horrible rape. But she plays herself, and they kind of reconstruct what happened. And just her sense of healing out of getting him to talk, understanding his lack of logic in what he did. That was... So that's a big part as well. Like, traditionally, acting for victims, we would be saying there have to be serious sentences. There have to be. You cannot get away with raping somebody.
Yes.
This mustn't be the case. But we also say, we recognise at the end of the rape, somebody is going to come out of prison. What has happened while they're in prison? What sex offender programs have they done? What other programs have they done? What happens when they come out? When they are related to the person? What do you do when your dad or your brother comes out of prison, even after a long sentence? Is he any better? Is he at risk of doing it again? How safe do you feel? How safe does a community feel when a convicted rapist finishes their sentence and comes out? What do we do about that? Do we isolate them off in a corner? Is that the best thing to do? Probably not. So it's a very complex area, but key to actually dealing with it is that we and the legal system and the justice system addresses it.
And you brought great experience with you to the Rape Crisis Centre from FLAC. You had been in FLAC for quite a while.
Yes,
and a force to be reckoned with inside FLAC.
Well, FLAC was unusual in that it was a small non-governmental organisation working on financial rights. And just about the time I went in, everyone said I was mad. I was a solicitor in private practice. And they all thought I was bonkers. Of course, they don't say that. People are really nice. They say you're very brave. And I totally understand when someone says you're very brave. Either you are very brave, like so many of the victims of sexual violence.
Or you're an idiot.
Or you're an idiot. Yeah, so that was absolutely, that I was an idiot. And I went in and then within a very short time, FLAC had been working on financial rights because it had been working on the rights of people who were dealing with moneylenders. And moneylenders were, could be pressing enough, and people didn't always understand their rights. So it was working with MABS in relation to that. And it understood a lot about financial rights, which was very important when the recession hit, because we were also working on social welfare, which was another area that was very important when the recession hit. And so with a government that was absolutely focused on protecting and saving the banks.
Yes.
Backed up by a European Union that was absolutely determined to save the banks.
Or they would set off a bomb in Dublin.
Yeah, exactly. They were prepared to let us sink if that was the case. With all of that going, there was a total loss of focus on the rights of people who were in debt. And that became a huge part of our work, linked in to the work around social welfare, the access to the legal system and legal aid, all of them combined to work with people who were in distress and who had rights that actually were not being recognised. And that then became, I suppose, others came in afterwards, but I suppose we were one of the first NGOs. No, MABS, that's not fair because MABS would have been there all along, but they were in a different position. They were kind of a state-funded service.
And they hadn't tooled up at this stage at all. I was on the ground floor. I remember the first people falling into mortgage difficulties and there being a 2-page Excel spreadsheet, which was money in, money out, what can you give me now?
Yeah.
And, these evolved into SFSs, the standard financial statements, which were also heartbreaking for people, where you were turning around to them and saying, okay, well, here we'll allow discretionary spend of $12.50 a month. Yes. So you could, if you can buy a birthday card or something
which was desperate. Those were desperate times where people were being asked to account for something, to account for everything. Did they really have to spend €100 a month on groceries? Why were they shopping in this shop rather than the other? I remember one couple that I dealt with where the question was, why was she shopping in the garage shop for nappies and things when they were so much cheaper somewhere else? And she said, it's because I'm a nurse. I'm coming home late at night. I'm coming in, I haven't seen my children all day. They've been mine to buy my mother-in-law. I'm coming in, and I have to bring home nappies, and that's the only place to buy them. And they were saying, well, you'll have to make different arrangements. And like people were doing their level best. One of the best things I think it was a whole combination of a whole lot of people, but we were in the mix, was when they were finally putting personal insolvency legislation in place. They put in minimum standards. They worked with this Vincentian Partnership for Social Justice and this powerhouse of a little nun who wouldn't thank me for calling her elderly, but Sister Bernadette McMahon has been around for generations. And she's a genius. She's Dr. Sister Bernadette McMahon. Do you know what I mean? She's total genius. And they had worked out, looking at what was a minimum living standard. Yeah. And it took into account things like that. Every 10 years, you might have to buy a bed. So you built in a tiny bit of the bed every month, you know, and therefore it looked bigger. That if you lived in the country, you needed 2 cars, not 1 car, not something the bankers were inclined to hear. But so she had built that up already, and it got built in to the personal insolvency legislation.
And it gave what you spoke to earlier about the basics for life. It gave a ground floor.
It gave a ground floor
that you couldn't fall below, which actually, and I'm going to say this as a banker, which actually tended to be slightly above what some of the banks were offering in terms of what you could live on. Like if they knew where you lived and they said, well, this is your commute, the banks couldn't say that you didn't need this for petrol and things like that, because they would literally get down to your mileage to say, well, you know, your mileage is too high.
Or you must have gone somewhere as well as to work in that car. And this said, if you were a single person, then €900 a month plus accommodation costs plus 1 or 2 childcare costs as well, were the others they put in, and the banks were not allowed to question them. It didn't stop some people being oppressive still in their questioning, but if they got onto a MABS or onto us or something, or if we could get the word out, they could go in and say, you have to accept that, and that is the basis, and that just was a different approach then.
But again, it was a lack of knowledge, because you had a central bank as a regulator playing the role of who's supposed to adjudicate on these, but they were saying, well, the bank's balance sheets are recovering, and this is all they were really saying, here's the quarterly reports to show that the number of arrears over 90 days, you know, so you were just a number in a system, and the volume of them was so vast that they weren't really going into some of the intricacies of what the individual cases were, you know?
Absolutely not. And I would have said right through that time, now my colleague Paul Joyce, who is a genius, he is the country expert on consumer rights and financial matters. He was working with me, but I would always have said, don't be asking the banks to do nice things. Banks are businesses. Yes. Do you know, like, it's not for them to be doing nice things. It is for the state, in that case, to regulate them in a way that did not oppress people. And to be honest, we're not out of the woods yet in that whole area. I'm not working in it anymore, but there is still huge pressure. The worry of people where TSB, for instance, now selling off, AIB selling off their loans to the venture funds, vulture funds, whichever name you prefer, and those people will not necessarily be bound by the sort of PR that AIB may have had to be bound by.
Yeah, the code of conduct on mortgage arrears, a lot of the third parties that are coming in, they will have a company that manages their loan book for them that they purchase now. And they've actually, I remember under Michael Noonan's time, the phrase was used, they will be bound by the spirit of the code. And I remember going mental that they used the word spirit of the code slipped into this agreement between our state and effectively vulture funds. And I just went, whoa, someone cut that out and say they'll be bound by the code.
Yeah.
No, the spirit of the code. And I just thought, well, hang on, there's a huge world of a difference. And, you know, and again...
well, banks are there to make profit.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
To expect a bank to have any moral stance, they're amoral.
And that's what was being asked. The Minister for Finance was asking the banks to behave like gentlemen.
Yes.
And ladies, but mainly gentlemen. And that effectively then allowed the banks to do what they like.
Well, they weren't going to be gentlemen. That was never. I mean, gentleman doesn't make a profit.
I'm going to disagree to some point, Martin. That there's awful things that have happened, and I can talk about them all day. But the number of repossessions that happened relative to the number of repossessions that could have happened is quite minuscule. Now, some of that is between the banks and the judiciary, where we've had judges give 2-year protections, and we've had these things where. But it certainly wasn't down to the behest of the Department of Finance or the state, because they kind of said, "Oh, we can't interfere in the individual running of the banks which we own," which was kind of an outrageous position from the outset. Like, I mean, I'm gonna go very micro on this. When you have people who are your local TD interfering in planning permissions and things like this, where we all get agitated, and where we own something. We own it, and we can put people on the boards of it. Yeah. We can have our own people representing public representatives on the board, and then we say we can't interfere. It kind of shows that the moral compass was not turned towards the citizen. It was much more so towards the balance sheet.
and that actually points to a lack or a gap in the structure. And so one of the things that was being explored by a lot of people during the recession, and is now being explored again, actually in the context of gender pay gaps, is the whole business of human rights budgeting, equality budgeting, gender budgeting. There's a whole lot of those names for systems that are quite alike. Now, they're not exactly the same, and I'm no genius at any of them, but it basically starts off from saying, when you're looking at how you construct your budget in any single year, you identify some principles. Like, for instance, you have a minimum core, you have a basic bottom line below which you do not go. When you're identifying what your assets are, you look at your income coming in through taxes and your expenses going out through public services, but you also look at what are your capital assets? What else do you have? So you look at everything you own, the way I suppose normal people do when they have to do their budgeting. And then you construct things in line with respect for people's human rights, with respect for equality, and with respect for equality in gender in particular. And if you actually go about your budget, if that was the construct for our budgets, we would have a state that would say, well, obviously we can't reduce these public services because they're crucial. Obviously, we don't need this kind of thing because it is not compliant with our human rights obligations in some way or another. Obviously, if we're going to achieve equality, we are going to have to preference, access for disability or something. Obviously, if we're going to do gender pay, we have to do something about this pensions issue, women's pensions issue. So, but this isn't actually makey uppy stuff. No. This is stuff that the system is there, and it's a question of, are they the values we want as a society?
But Noeline, the system's kicking back. Report after report now has been brought out to show, like, Uber produced a report to say that the gender pay gap is a myth because the male drivers versus female drivers, the male drivers will actually, take these things, and so the system kicks back, and then when you allow for deviations in work patterns, you go, well, actually, no, it does exist. It's a 23% pay gap, but the system is kicking back against these human rights issues.
Absolutely, so, but I never mind that either. Because I like arguing.
Yeah, you like to have a bit of a.
But the other thing is, it means they're being interrogated. When nobody was asking about it at all, that's when we were in trouble. So again, during the recession, you couldn't talk about the gender pay gap. People were saying, God almighty, how lucky you are to have a job. And didn't recognise that precarious work was coming down the line quite as fast as it was, that the conditions for precarious work were so limited, and that the protections, were so limited in that kind of work. So all of that was allowed to happen. So the kickback means that Uber has to actually say something, and you can say, well, now, do you know what? We can parse that a little bit down as well and see, is it true? Because if the gender pay gap was a myth, we should stop talking about it. But there's so much evidence there that it exists that we are going to.
I suppose for me, the government, and just the one example is the teachers.
Yes.
Predominantly a woman's job. Predominantly.
Yeah.
It's okay to have unequal pay within that. I don't get this. If you have a government that is set on equality, and Fine Gael have said we are set on equality, then how can you justifiably preside over an unequal pay system where predominantly affects women and say there's absolutely nothing we can do about this?
Yeah. And it's not the only area of the public service that's coming back into. I think you also have to say, why did the unions allow that to
Oh,
happen?
yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Look, we know that.
Yes.
That is a drum we beat often and loudly.
Unions in my book don't exist over a period of 5 years. They exist for 100 years,
Yes.
150 years, and the members for that 5 years should not be allowed to sell out the members, all the members that have been, and all the members that are coming.
And this goes back to the precarious, the what they call the locked out generation, where people have, as you said, different, same work, different terms and conditions.
There's a tyranny of age there.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. And there's other things happening then as well in the same area. And just coming back to, say, my current work with the Rape Crisis Centre, if you're looking at what we do, we provide a state service.
Yes.
But not on the terms and conditions that state employees would get if they were doing it, you know. So in a sense, they outsource.
They outsource it to you,
and we provide it much more cheaply than the state could. And that's actually considered a good thing. And still, on the other hand, you're looking, is it fair that if somebody is working in a state counselling service, they're getting this much, and if they're working with us, they're getting that much.
And we have called it out continuously, particularly around the homeless and housing crisis, where we have the state referring to NGOs as our partners and our service providers. And that is just absolutely appalling if you actually look at what that language means. It means that they've taken the responsibility of care of citizens and outsourced it to a charity, and they turn around and you have a charity that's dependent on the state for funding, unable to kick back at the state that's helping exacerbate an issue, and the whole vicious circle just repeats. And you know,
well, the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre is the precariat. I mean, it is in a precarious position. It moves with the whims of government at any particular time.
Now, I think they would properly say that they have never threatened to cut us off or anything like that. But exactly as you say, and just going back to what we were talking about before, they did during the recession. They did just say, "This is your grant. It's less than last year's grant. Live with it, suck it up, keep up the service, and just manage it." So that is true. Everyone outside the public service still remains the most stable place for work. But even within it, and just going back to the teachers, you do have the dual lines, and it is very hard to see why that should continue. My understanding was that it was not to continue, that it would be sorted out over time. But I think the teachers are going, sort it now.
Oh, well, I think, and I think if I was in that position, I'd feel really miffed as well. Really. I mean, it's inherently unfair.
Well, you can't have a government, unfortunately for the government who do like marketing. Let's spade a spade. They're very good at marketing, putting it out there. You can't market recovery, and you can't market, the fastest growing economy in the EU
without somebody saying
exactly.
Hello. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we had a budget process where the government was coming in saying to the teachers, "You'll have to put up with it," saying to the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, "You'll have to put up with it, because actually what we're doing is putting a massive amount into social housing to give everyone a roof over their head." I just think we would all, most of us, would be prepared to live with that.
I called for a neutral budget, didn't I, Martin? I said, give me a neutral budget where you're gonna, because I don't want €5 a week, where I could have where I could have a social housing street, and we're not talking just building houses for people on the waiting list. We're talking about people, where you can make affordable houses for people on that can't get a mortgage from a bank, but could afford a mortgage of 170,000. Build their houses.
Put more into all of that. So, or you decide what you're going to do is you're going to implement Sláinte Care. The big health project. All of those things, I think the rest of us would have to say, well, we'll have to wait because this is the greater good. But when you don't see it, then all of us are fighting for our own little bit of the pot.
That seems, a paradox that exists at the moment is we have a government that tells us we're in recovery, and yet we have public services that are subject to FEMPI.
Yes.
So you have a national emergency in one hand and a recovering economy in the other. And you can't.
It is very hard. Somebody is going to, exactly as you were saying, Tony, somebody's going to ask the question, where's with the money for the recovery, what exactly is happening?
And the big issue is, and I mean this as someone who's concerned about the economics of it, is after this budget, the gloves can come off because we'll have gotten back to the debt to GDP ratio that means we can start to, and I think what we'll actually end up with is, unfortunately, and I actually think Pascal Donoghue won't do it. He doesn't want to be, he wants to be prudent.
Yes.
Okay? But I think the pressure comes on from the top down to be popular with the electorate, and that means a little bit for everyone.
Yes.
Which doesn't get us what we need.
It doesn't. And that's in the context of Brexit.
Yes.
Where you know, you might be like the prudent thing the thing we might all be saying is don't give any of us a pay increase, don't give us any of us extra funding, because you need a big stash of money for when that comes in. I mean, we're not, but it's just like, I would love to know at the end of the day, I would love to know that this is the amount of money we're going to spend in the year, and it's going to make us a better society.
Yes. Yeah. That we will actually improve something.
Can we broaden that out then to the wider issue? Because what we've seen in the last while, we've seen the outrageous situation where 10 days now after Vicky Phelan's case was made public. 10 days.
Yeah.
And we're still talking about the mechanisms that we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I find that absolutely abhorrent that we want to talk, the rows they're having are about the mechanisms of having a row. Why haven't we just moving on into actually, let's start these investigations, start the process that has to happen, and let's have some accountability and some people stand up and actually say, well, the buck stops at my desk, or whatever the case may be, and assume responsibility. We seem to have a dysfunctional thing where we just want to brazen it out and...
But the blueprint is there, going back to the Hep C.
Yes.
And the blueprint is there. Nobody resigns. Nobody gets in trouble. Lots of nice words. A couple of pages written. And then it will repeat until somebody is actually gone. Until there is some responsibility. A minister wasn't told. Well, the minister wasn't told because he's not strong enough in his department. They don't fear the minister. They have no respect for the minister. So fire the minister. The next time there's a minister in that department, he'll make damn sure that those people will respect and inform him. And if you don't break the cycle, it's always...
I'm only, and I know it's not always right to make it, some of these are false equivalences, but Amber Rudd stood down over the Windrush scandal in the UK. Over a memo that happened under the watch of Theresa May.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a lot we can disagree with British politics, and we inherited their system, and our system doesn't necessarily fit their model. Okay, we can all agree that. But there is an integrity to at least saying, well, I was actually, I was top of the ship, and I will take this, and I will take my medicine, whether it's Tony O'Brien or whether it's someone. Where is the person standing up and saying, I take responsibility for this? 10 days on, and it's all about, let's have an investigation to see who's going to take responsibility.
Well, and Dr. Flannery stood down, the head of she.
Oh, sorry.
And I wonder whether that's part of it. As, she did stand down within 3 or 4 days.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's one of the things I've noticed it about the health system over all the years. The Department of Health can always say, oh, well, that's the HSE. It's a separate thing. And the HSE says, oh, but that's the Department of Health. And the minister actually doesn't end up with much responsibility for an organisation that's huge and that's managing all of the health services of the country.
But we see that, I'm sorry to do it again, but you're talking again the Department of Justice and An Garda Síochána pointing at one another as well over the whole scandal with Maurice McCabe and whistleblowers. And you're saying, well, that's their responsibility, and they're saying that's their responsibility, and it all falls into the cracks.
Well, this all plays to where we are in Ireland at the moment, and we're talking about accountability and responsibility, and we're talking about many different fronts. We're talking about it, and politicians need to catch up with where the population are. We are all talking accountability, responsibility, duty, consent, and yet we have politicians that are nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us.
Do you know what? The cynic in me says, what value would it be for them to actually say, yes, I will be more accountable? Like,
but I think
all they're going to get out of that is sacked.
Yeah, but I do think that, if there is, I think you can be honourable and stand out
Yeah.
I think it's
The last
being
person-
honourable will get you re-elected.
No, hang on. The last person who did that was Trevor Sargent, and
yeah.
and his career was over
Yeah,
24 hours later.
It's true.
You know?
It's true. I think it nearly has to be at a cultural level in some ways that we all demand it all the time, that we're not looking to our TDs to fix the potholes, which is kind of the key thing, that it's not our TD's job to get a new factory in our constituency or whatever, and that we all say we respect what you're doing in there in the Dáil, because we don't actually come the bottom line. For a lot of us, we are just really interested in them being in their clinic on a Tuesday night to answer my question about the grant that hasn't come through or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So we're probably a long way from a place where accountability is valued. Really, I think all anyone would say is if a minister stood down, well, blasted, that means that the minister has gone from my constituency, or I knew the minister, now I have to find a new person that I know in that department. And then there is the lack of accountability of the permanent civil service.
Yes.
Yes,
you know,
which is really the problem.
Yeah.
Which is really the problem.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it was actually the problem with Amber Rudd. I think Amber Rudd going is not necessarily going to fix the Windrush problem either.
No, it's not. And that, all I was trying to speak to was integrity.
Yes, exactly right. I am the boss at the end of the day.
You know, David Cameron lost the Brexit vote and his referendum, and the next day he called a press conference, and I was actually, what's he doing? He's resigning.
Yeah.
This guy had a sterling career in front of him.
And the people in the background, like I think it was Oliver Callan did a sketch of Enda Kenny ringing him saying, "What are you doing? Just hold it again."
Yeah.
And I wonder, but that we would have, we would have just said, "What are you?"
Yeah, we're better at referendums than there.
Well, that brings us around to where we are now with Repeal the Eighth, and you're a very strong voice and a very reasonable voice on Repeal the Eighth.
Yeah, so we're just coming at it again from the point of view of the women, and that we deal with, and the women that we know about who get pregnant as a result of rape, and we haven't actually allied ourselves with any particular side, because we say we empower all women to heal. But what we have said and what we've come out with, and what's a good chance for me again to say, we have come out to remind everybody that people do get pregnant as a result of rape. Amazingly, you have to remind people about that, and that people make all sorts of decisions when they do get pregnant. Often we won't hear about it until years after. Indeed, someone might be coming in for counselling, may never mention it. But from what we know that some women carry the children, some women have terminations, some women miscarry, some women place the children with carry the children and place them in foster care or for adoption. All of these are decisions that people make. About a third, as far as we can see. A third have the baby, a third terminate, and a third miscarry, or have the other remedies are kind of fading away.
Yeah.
It used to be more the case in older times where there weren't many options for people. So that's we also know the other thing, and that is that for anyone to suggest that it would be a good idea that women who were raped should be able to access a service by telling someone they were raped, that would be such a bad idea. No one should be forced to report rape in order to access a service. And we went both before the Citizens' Assembly and the Oireachtas Committee. I was there. Maeve Ogan, who runs the Sexual Assault Treatment Unit in the Rotunda, was there, really good about the consequences of how you can't actually identify whether someone was raped or not, simply because they're pregnant, or, even by examining them. And then Tom O'Malley, a law lecturer from Galway, was there as well. And he made it clear it would be almost impossible to legislate for rape. So for reasons of protecting victims, not traumatising them, and for reasons of sheer legality, you can't say we should have a system that would help people who are raped to access abortion, but nobody else. Yes. So our big three things are, yes, women get pregnant. Yes, women have a lot, they deal with it in a lot of different ways. And please do not make them report rape in order to access a service.
It's basically, there are choices, and women have, and of course the choices are limited in those circumstances. They are limited choices, but they are choices. Some of the choices are, under the laws we have at the moment, illegal, but they happen.
They happen.
So you can't say by fact of the law is there that you're stopping these things happening. It is happening. Yeah. Just
you're either going to have illegal abortions carried out or legal abortions.
Just deal with
I mean, and as you're quite right. Imagine the adding the trauma of saying you have to report a rape in order to get the care that you want.
Yeah. I mean, who would you report it to?
Yeah.
The first thing is you would have to report it to someone who would certify, I believe her. And the one thing we don't do is we don't judge.
No.
And we just, people come in, we believe them. If they are in with us, they are reporting a sexual assault or trauma of some sort, or they're supporting someone like that, we believe them. We're not going to ask them to do anything. But we also want to be clear that some women who are raped will go ahead with the pregnancy, and that is their choice as well.
Yes.
We will help people, we'll put them in touch with crisis pregnancy services, whoever they want to. But actually, what's interesting and what we found when we were preparing, particularly for the Citizens' Assembly, was that if someone phones up and it becomes clear to our counsellor that they might risk pregnancy as well as, disease and various things, they kind of tend to put down the phone very fast, because the trauma of the rape is not their main thing now. It's it's dealing with the consequences, the pregnancy, the possible STIs, the disease that might happen as a result, the need perhaps for, to just deal with all of that, the need for medical care. So very often, and then they'll deal with that and then maybe come back to us again a little bit later. So every single person reacts differently. And I'm still seeing people saying that, of course, somebody will report a rape immediately. If someone is raped, of course they'll report it and access the morning after pill and the rest of it. This is not the case. As a matter of fact, this is not the case. And what we hope to do, and what we've up on our website, is just the information that we have about pregnancy as a result of rape, so that people will read the information, just absorb it for themselves, and build that into their calculations when they go to the polls.
What you're providing is what and what we've discussed previously, is you're not going on a gut feeling. You are going on data that you have received.
Yeah.
So in that you are standing for women, you're seen as an independent voice for women. You're not trying to sway anybody one way or another. No. But it is all about choices.
Yeah.
And it's all about the choices that will suit that individual woman at that particular time in her life.
Yes.
And
yes.
Who are we to deny women those choices? Just who are we to deny them those choices?
Yes. Yes. And yes, exactly right. There's if we could actually empower people to make their own decisions with all the rights that they need around them, we will have made a massive advance. There's so many complications, and sexual violence complicates life. I use the word disruptive about it the whole time. I know people use that word a good bit, but it's a disruptive harm, and it's a disruptive crime. It disrupts the community, because so many people know the person who's either carrying it out or they know the victim. It's disruptive to the person themselves. It actually reduces their capacity to work, to have a family, to have a relationship. It's really disruptive. And then it's a disruptive crime because people who carry out the crime can carry it out in private places and can do this harm without anyone seeing. And we need to take that hiddenness out of it, and we need to be able to support people who are victims of it, who are survivors of it. And there's always this debate: do we call them victims? Do we call them survivors? I think it kind of depends on the context. They're victims of a crime, and they're victims of a harm, and they survive it, and they're great to survive it. But and then they're the complainants as well when they go into court. But which or whether, it's not right that we still have such a strong sense that this harm is rife and that we could actually do more about it. So
well, the first would be to measure.
Yes. Well, it is great now that the government is looking at, has this report. It has a scoping group finished its report. It's with the Minister for Justice. It was to go to Cabinet or to a Cabinet subcommittee, but I'm sure over the past 10 days they've been absolutely focusing on the cervical screening tragedy that it is. And I absolutely understand that. But I will be waiting for an announcement to hear that they're going ahead with the second SAVI study. It won't be able to do what it should be able to do, and that is to measure trends, really, because if the last one was in 2002 and this is now, and the internet has happened in between time, if nothing else, it's just a whole different world. I mean, the internet was there, but it wasn't
as wide.
Wasn't in your hand.
Right. It wasn't in your hand. Yeah. Exactly right. So all of that, but it should be able to measure prevalence. And if by the end of this year we had a better understanding of the prevalence of sexual violence in Ireland, we actually could make much better choices as a country, and we could do much more focused work when we work with victims. So it's like, it's a win. It's a win if we do it. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, all I can say is thank you so much for coming in to us here today. I wish we could clone you.
Thanks. It's been a blast. I've had a great time. I just like you guys are great to talk to.
I'm very optimistic because we talk about these difficult things that are and things that we have to face as a society and face as but I actually see the conversations are happening so much more. As you said, the internet has arrived, but it's also connected people that thought they were alone. You have people telling their stories, and then they're receiving powerful messages from other people who are then going to share their stories. We are seeing this now. We have to believe that if we can take that energy, harness that energy, and actually then, as you say, with the support of government and the support of actual putting structures on it, there's reason to be optimistic. The sun is shining, guys. Let's finish it with a smile, But Noeline, I share it. Thank you so much. I think
I'm delighted to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thanks. As I say, it's great talking to you both. Thanks very much, Tony.
Not at all. Listen, folks. Thanks for listening. Hit subscribe, leave us a review, tell your friends. This is it. This is how we go. We're in your pockets. We're on the phone. So this is the new world. We need you to share the message.
We're in your head.
Cheers, guys.